This will not be the last Greg Cosell conversation of the year.
All right.
We're talking playoffs.
Playoffs,
exactly. But not yet. Joining us right now, as he does on Wednesdays, River Island's guest line, none other than the executive producer at NFL Films. He knows the X's, the O's, the all 22s better than anyone. He is Greg Cosell. Happy New Year to our friend.
Happy New Year, guys. Good to be with you. Glad you're back. I wish I got some time off, but that doesn't happen.
I think that you probably could take it. You just don't. You're like one of these Christian McCaffrey, Ricky Pearsall guys. Like you love to work.
Well, I do, and I always feel like there's more to see and more to do. So yeah, I can't really take time off. It doesn't work with my whole sense of the world,
So between the Super Bowl and the NFL draft, you're just grinding on college tape, or are you doing that already year-round anyway?
No, I can't do it during the NFL season. I can start doing it probably next week because then I have fewer games I have to watch for the NFL. So once the matchup show is kind of my pieces, my film segments are done and it's all mapped out, then I can start watching college tape. So I'll probably start next week, and because of course everybody's going to ask me about the quarterbacks, I'll start. I won't watch 15 quarterbacks, but I'll watch a couple of the main guys. I'll do Ward, I'll do Sanders, I'll do those guys relatively early on.
Yeah, but probably not us because the Niners have theirs, at least so they say. They have no hesitation moving forward with Brock Purdy. They want to do an extension early. So let's ask you this, because obviously, Greg, this was not as good of a year as the last two. What is your full season takeaway of Brock Purdy?
Well, I would say that Purdy overall did not necessarily play as well this year as he did a year ago, and I think we discussed that through the season. I'm sure there are reasons for that. I thought at times he was a little quick to break down and leave the pocket. A lot of people talked about how mobile he is, and that's fine when it's necessary and needed. But if it's not necessary and needed, then you want to see him work through the offense. I don't know what's in his head, so there's parts that I can't answer. But, it's funny. So many teams, when the quarterback doesn't play as well as people expect and the year is disappointing, they automatically assume that, it's time to get a new quarterback. We can't give this guy money. You have to, first of all, you've got to separate the money because the money is just what it is. That's just the reality of life. But I think some people think there must be like a quarterback school that you just go to and get any quarterback that you want. Quarterbacks don't just fall out of the sky. So Brock Purdy has proven to be a quality NFL quarterback. It was only a year ago that this team was in the Super Bowl, and you're not going to start over at the quarterback position because if you decide that you didn't want to sign him, let me ask you guys this, then what's the next move?
The next move would be get a middling free agent who's not as good, or hope that you get somebody in the draft, and you probably won't when you're picking in the high teens.
And it's also not a great quarterback draft based on some work that I did last summer of watching a ton of quarterbacks. Obviously, I haven't done the work from the 2024 season, but I think from people I've spoken to, this is not viewed as a great quarterback draft. So it's easy to say, oh, we don't want to pay Brock Purdy whatever that number is, and the number is just the number because that's the market value of quarterbacks. So he's going to get close to or whatever the number is. So that has to be separated from the reality of having a quarterback.
Yeah.
Because you're right. Because otherwise, here's what happens. And fans, maybe they think about this, maybe they don't. If you decide, well, Brock Purdy's not my quarterback, then here's what ends up happening. You sign guys like Mason Rudolph to a 1-year deal, and he becomes your quarterback.
Exactly right. And like you're right, I think we all agree, there isn't another great option. But just because we hear this a lot from fans, and I think part of it is because he was in the building last year and then went 14-3 this year. Like, what did you see with Sam Darnold this year that was maybe different from years past?
I think Darnold was clearly better than he's ever been, and I think that there were a couple of areas in which he clearly improved. He was far more decisive in the pocket. I think some of that is a function of how comfortable he clearly felt in that pass offense. We don't know. He may have been that way if he had played last year in Kyle's offense. We don't know the answer to that because he didn't play. I thought he was much better in terms of being confident, staying in the pocket, and making late in the down throws when there are people around him. Because even though he's mobile and a plus athlete, he's essentially a pocket quarterback, and he was very comfortable because there were a lot more intermediate to vertical routes in the Vikings offense than there were in the 49ers offense, and he was very comfortable sitting there and waiting to make throws. So, he's had a very good season. He's got a lot of talent. I mean, he's a big kid, good athlete, really good arm, and it all came together this year in Minnesota. So, it's easy to say, well, gee, we should have kept Sam Darnold. But, that stuff's easy to say. I mean, Brock, unless I have a bad memory, I think the 49ers were in the Super Bowl last year with Brock Purdy, were they not?
Yeah, your memory's still pretty solid, Greg, even at our advanced age. You're still...
My advanced age is probably more than your advanced age.
A little bit more advanced, yes. I'm going to give you that one, and we don't have to go to the film for that breakdown. It's just facts are facts. I do want to ask you, though, about what you saw on the tape that led to the passing offense in totality being less effective this year. What did you see through all 17 games from the passing offense?
The passing offense was a really difficult thing to evaluate because if you kind of look at the overall season, Purdy still had a high yards per attempt. There were still, downfield throws. It wasn't as if the passing offense didn't work at all. So it was kind of an odd year. You could almost argue that the run game was more of an issue. Now, I know early in the season, Mason got off to a good start, and that's when the Niners were obviously playing well. That's when at one point, were they 4-3 at one point? I'm trying to remember the season.
I think they got to 4-4, and then they went 5-5. But I don't think they were 4-3. My memory serves they were 3-4. But anyway,
6 games, so they only won 2 of their last whatever it was.
Yep.
So, early in the season, even though it wasn't McCaffrey, Mason ran well. Their offense was what it's designed to be, which is based more on balance and the run game as a starting point because they play a ton out of 21 personnel. That's their foundation. And the pass game kind of works off that with a lot of things they do because don't forget, their run game dictates how defenses line up. Then McCaffrey came back, and obviously he didn't gain a lot of yards, and that's a debatable point about his health. But the point is the run game sort of stopped working at that point, and it didn't really work that well for the rest of the season. So the offense didn't really have the multi-dimensional element that they certainly had a year ago when many would have argued that McCaffrey should have been the league MVP. So, I think it's more of a totality. Look, Purdy is not Josh Allen. He's not Patrick Mahomes. He's not Joe Burrow. He's not Lamar. No one would argue that. When all is going well, Purdy is a high-level executor and ball distributor. That's what Brock Purdy is. And if people think he's more than that, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. It's good. But if people think he's more, he's not that. That's what he is. So when things don't work, when they lose a Brandon Ayuk and they don't have the same receiving core that they anticipated, then things don't work quite as well. Don't forget, Juwan Jennings is a nice player, and I actually loved him coming out of college because of his toughness and competitiveness. But when all's said and done, in an ideal world, Juwan Jennings is a number 3. So when he becomes sort of the main guy, and for whatever reason, then your offense is not going to have a great passing game.
And you look at the X going forward, the X wide receiver, who's usually your number 1 wide receiver. Ayuk likely out till October. Can Ricky Pearsall step in and be that guy, or do they have to go hunting for a real number 1 receiver?
That's a great question. He's the best option of the receivers that are there because, as we've discussed with Samuel many times, good player, but he's somewhat of a scheme player. We discussed that he's not Jefferson, Chase, A.J. Brown. He's not that guy. So, in an ideal world, could it be Pearsall? Ideally he gets through, a whole off season now. You saw what he could do a little bit as the year progressed. He's got some juice to him. We'll see. I don't know the answer to that. They may feel they know the answer to that, but in this league, and I've had this conversation with wide receiver coaches at the Combine, and I end up having this conversation almost every year, and they all talk about the fact that if you don't have a quality X receiver in this league who you can line up as your boundary single receiver to win one-on-one, because you usually get a lot of man coverage with that boundary X, that your offense can become bogged down. So that receiver becomes important. So I don't think we know yet about Pearsall as that guy. As much as I like him, I don't know if he is that guy.
I would love to hear just your take on those last two games, because you said, we saw a little bit about what he could do, and I'll let you know, people out here are suddenly very, very excited based on those last couple of games. What's your sort of more intricate take on what we saw from him?
I didn't, as you guys know, I didn't feel like I needed the last two games to know what I think Ricky Pearsall is. I think Ricky Pearsall is a really smooth, fluid athlete. I think he has a good feel for route running. I think he's got some run after catch ability. I just don't know yet, based on his NFL sample size, which is not large, obviously, if he can line up as a true X. But I think Ricky Pearsall is going to be a really good receiver. It just depends on what kind of really good he is. I'll give you an example. I think we'd all agree that Amon-Ra St. Brown is a really good receiver, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
But he's not Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. But he's a really good NFL receiver. I don't know if Ricky Pearsall would ever get to, the Jefferson, Chase, A.J. Brown level of receiver, or Devontae Adams in his prime, but he could still end up being a really, really good receiver. Just like Amon-Ra St. Brown is not a true boundary X, but he's a really good receiver.
And you look at so many teams now that throw the ball with three wides, you can kind of get away with a guy who can be productive out of the slot. I want to ask you about the defense, because the defensive coordinator hasn't been fired, but he's been removed from his post. And, you watch the film all year, Greg, and you see this wide nine defense. And I wonder, when you look at the film, what was missing from this defense that made it so they were a little bit susceptible to the run?
Well, and I'm very curious to see what they do, because I think there's a philosophy issue here. I mean, when I say issue, they may see it as an issue, they may not see it as an issue. And obviously, they removed Sorensen, so they're going to have their fourth D coordinator in 4 years. This was a team, and it's funny because this week they did blitz quite a bit early on in the game. But this is a defense that was a very low blitz percentage defense. They did not play a ton of man-to-man, so they relied on their front four to pressure the quarterback. So the question is, philosophically, is Kyle looking for a change? Is Kyle looking to bring someone in who's going to be more aggressive with pressure schemes? We don't know the answer to that right now, but I'm curious to see, because, as I said, this becomes a philosophy issue. How do you feel? How do you want your defense to look in today's NFL? Do you feel like you have to get after the quarterback? And when I say blitz, I don't mean that you're blitzing 50, 60, 70% of the time, but the 49ers were a very, very low percentage blitz defense by NFL standards. And it's funny, I put the tape on from this week, just because I wanted to get a feel for who they played and what guys looked like. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing on 2 of the first 3 third downs, they rushed 5. Warner, who in the past was used as a blitzer at times, he's being used as the 5th rusher with multiple stunt concepts and different kinds of pressures. So it'll be interesting to see what direction they go as with a D coordinator.
Greg Cosell, NFL Films, with us every week on Willard and Tibbs 95.7 The Game. Greg, I'm sure you get this, especially now that he's the highest paid defensive player in the game. Fans want more sacks, and since he's signed that deal, Nick Bosa's sack totals haven't been where you would love them to be. There's a lot of context to that, but fans are, I don't want to say down on him, but a little, like there's a mild disappointment there. I wonder what you can tell our listeners about the way he's actually performed the last couple seasons.
I don't think that's fair, because I can't tell you how many times I've watched the Niners defense this year, and I've called in my guys, on the matchup show, because we have our little area with the matchup show. We got a bunch of guys that work with me on the show, and I'll call them in and say, "Man, look at Bosa. He's just dominating." And he may not get a sack, because there's many reasons you don't get sacks, but I don't think there's a problem with Nick Bosa. Keep one thing in mind. I don't know how many times he's rushed the quarterback this year, the number of times that he's been a pass rusher. Maybe it's 350 times. I don't know. But let's say that's the number. if a guy gets 12 sacks out of 350 pass rushes, they say he has a great year, right? But if he gets 9 sacks, they say, man, he's not getting enough sacks. Is that really the way we want to judge a pass rusher? Think about it. Is that really the way we want to judge a pass rusher?
No, I mean,
I would say no.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think when you kind of think about it, that's why, and again, I'm fortunate in my job that I can sit and watch every play, okay? And when I start watching college guys, that's what I do with defensive guys. I can't tell you how many times, for instance, I'll watch a defensive tackle in college, and if you look at the stat sheet, I see he has 1 tackle, and then I watch all 70 plays in the game, of which the guy played 50, and I come away going, man, that guy dominated the game. You know, so you have to be careful about that. You've got to look at every play and see how he's playing, not just the pure number of sacks, which, you know, so I thought Nick Bosa, I didn't think there was a problem with Nick Bosa.
And I think that kind of applies to what I'm thinking about Fred Warner, because early in the year, his numbers, forced fumbles, and he had a couple of interceptions. People were talking about Defensive Player of the Year, and the numbers kind of fell off. When you watch Fred Warner on tape all year, what did you see from a guy who might be heading to Canton eventually?
I think he should be, you know, up to this point in his career. I think pretty much everybody would say that he's the best stack backer in the game. You know, and again, did he play with an injury through the last part of this season?
Oh,
Most
yes.
of the year, yeah.
Broken bone in his ankle, yeah.
Yeah, because I thought there were some stretches this year where, you know, to me, he wasn't quite as impactful on tape. But then there were other times I was like, man, that Fred Warner is just unbelievable. So, you know, again, you can get caught up in, you know, that kind of conversation. But, you know, Fred Warner is just a great football player. And, you know, from what I read, I'm not in their building, obviously, nor am I out with you guys. But, I mean, from what I understand, he's a great leader. He's kind of the driving force of the defense. So, I mean, obviously, Fred Warner's not going anywhere. So, we'll see what happens. I know Greenlaw, this was a lost year for Greenlaw, and I think he's a really important player. I thought Winters acquitted himself pretty well. He played a lot of snaps over the last, month or so, give or take. I thought he acquitted himself pretty well.
Greg, I'd love, and maybe this is too broad of a question, but I'm going to take my shot here going into the playoffs and ask you, with all of these teams coming up this weekend, you know, some of them, obviously there's a couple of first-round buys, but like, of all these teams playing this weekend in the playoffs, give us a couple teams who you feel are kind of peaking. Like, who's playing really well right now?
I tell you, a team that really interests me, and I'm very curious, and I know probably most observers think it's, you know, a no-brainer that the other team's going to win big, but the Broncos fascinate me right now.
Yep.
Bo Nix has played really, really well. We know Sean Payton is a very good coach, and because of Bo Nix, their defense has not gotten, to me, the conversation that it deserves. They lead the NFL in sacks. They've got arguably the best corner in the game. Their defense is really good. It's fast. It's young. It's got Zach Allen at D-tackle, who no one talks about, is as good a D-tackle as there is in the game. He never comes off the field. The Broncos are a fascinating team to me, and the Bills' defense is not quite at the level. To me, it's not a championship-level style defense. So that game fascinates me.
And when you look at that matchup with the Denver defense, and I think you're right in terms of how underrated they are, can they keep up with the Josh Allen two-way threat and what can be an explosive offense with Buffalo playing at home?
Yeah, and that's the issue, because I think Buffalo at its core is an offensive team. I think they were second in the league in points. You know, Allen is obviously a great individual player. I mean, what he's done without a 1,000-yard rusher and 1,000-yard receiver is really impressive. We know he's just a physical specimen. He's the most purely physically gifted quarterback in the league and can do special things at any moment. But every once in a while, they get kind of a lull in their offense. And, you know, again, if you're a Bills fan, not that you guys are, but I'm just saying if you're a Bills fan, there's a little part of me that worries about this game. Like, you know, again, could Allen be phenomenal and could they win 30-13? Sure. I'm a very bad prognosticator, by the way. I can't pick these games because I could give you 10 variables on both sides.
Right.
No, we're all placing bets based on every word right now. Like, this is what we're doing.
Right, so I'm a really bad prognosticator, but the point is you know, this game, I think, you know, could be a little concerning.
Yeah, you know who fascinates me every January is the Baltimore Ravens, because it feels like they should have probably had a longer resume in the Lamar Jackson era in January. But did they sort of like fix something on defense that was ailing them early in the year?
They made a major change starting week 11 with Kyle Hamilton, who basically had been kind of a multi-dimensional movement chess piece in their defense, playing a lot of different positions. They basically moved him to back-end safety starting week 11. And since they did that, if I'm not mistaken, they're the number one number one third down defense in the league. Their sack totals have gone way up with only a 4-man pass rush. Everything seemed to change when they moved Kyle Hamilton basically to back-end safety instead of kind of a movable chess piece. So that's when their defense changed. It's really funny because their offensive coordinator, Todd Monken, who obviously was in college and he's been there a couple of years, he's talked about the fact that the key to their whole offense is Derrick Henry. Lost in the Saquon Barkley season, and deservedly so, Barkley's had a ridiculous season, is the fact that Derrick Henry rushed for over 1,900 yards. That doesn't get talked about a lot because Lamar's numbers have been so off the charts, and he's had such a special season as well. But they're really, so many of these teams, it's an odd thing. So many of these teams are kind of run-first teams now. Everybody talks about the quarterback, and I'm not saying he's not important, believe me. But so many of these teams start their offense with the run game.
Hey, Greg, wonderful stuff again. We thank you throughout the season, but as I mentioned off the top, we're not done yet. So we'll talk to you next week, okay, friend?
I got to be with you guys again next week.
That's the word. I just read the contract. You're in.
Yeah, boy.
I'm joking, guys. Come on. I love talking to you guys.
That's awesome, Greg.
We'll talk to you next week, Greg.
All right. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
There it is, Greg Cosell. And yes, put it all on the Broncos plus 9.5. That's what I heard.
9.5. I'm seeing it at 8.5 here on ESPN.
It's where I do
forecast at 1 in the afternoon. It's a 1 o'clock local time.
Yes,
29 degrees is your local forecast.
That's okay as long as it's clear.
But that's the heat of the day.
Yeah, but it's the Broncos. It's not like they're not used to cold weather.
Yeah,
they're fine.
There's some interesting picks. We can get into it as we get deeper into the weekend.
You're doing the full slate, right?
I'll give you all 6, kid. I'll give you 5, and then on Monday I'll give you Monday. Yeah. And I'm actually going to branch out.
Money this weekend.
Not going to all be just sides. There might be a total thrown in there as well.
Oh, that's
totals.
Fancy.
Yeah,
fancy.
Yep.
All right. 888. Thank you very much. 888-957-9570. 1-800-bet.